Hey everybody, welcome back. I'm the Strategy Professor, and today we're going to be looking at the tier list for support in patch 1122. So as always, if you enjoy the content, please be sure to like and subscribe. It really helps out a ton on the channel. Come by, check out the stream. It's only on Twitch these days, no longer streaming on YouTube. So only on Twitch around midnight Eastern Standard Time every night. Very friendly, chill community. We'd love to have you if you want to come in and tell us about some new cool builds that you've seen, or just talk about your day, hang out, whatever you want to do. We're happy to hang out with you. We have a really cool community, so come by, check that out. And I'm going to try to be more active on YouTube as well. I know I haven't posted as many videos as I'd like over the last couple of months, but I have been doing the patch notes and the tier list. I'm going to keep up with that, but I still want to do tier lists for other roles as well. So I'm going to try to do smaller tier lists, maybe 20 minutes or so. I know it's been a meme for years doing fast tier lists, but we're going to try to do that. And then that way it will give us a little more content to sprinkle in throughout the week. And I'll be doing a lot more coverage of preseason or any more interesting builds that come out where I break that down for you. So I did break down all of the preseason items with the numbers that we have so far, and I give you some ideas of what might be strong, what might be weak, which champions it might be good on, how it might alter the meta game. It's a pretty long video. It's about an hour long, but be sure to check it out. It's got lots of good information there for you. And I am going to be aiming to release at least one Total War video per day, getting back to that. If you're interested in that, check that out. And I'm going to be covering Final Fantasy Endwalker when that releases, I think November the 19th. So if you're interested in that, if you've heard a lot about that game, it's really, really good. Just Final Fantasy 14 in general, I've been playing it sort of off-channel just to kind of learn a little bit more about it and level up. But it is a really fun game. Okay, let's go ahead and get in here. So I shuffled up the tier list a little bit, but it's going to be a lot of the usual suspects near the top. So first of all, Recon. Y'all know how I feel about Recon. I think he's just always really strong, and I'll go ahead and type this out here. Domination at Worlds, as per usual. I talked about this in the last tier list. He's almost always perennially one of the most underestimated champions. Everyone will have him in like C tier or something, but he's just a powerhouse in almost every meta, because he's so versatile. He's so good in so many different comps, so many different strategies. He has a ton of different items that he can use and be effective. He can engage, he can disengage, he can roam, he can scale with his shields. He can get things like the Putrefier, which is the best Grievous Wound item, 60% for only 2,300 gold, that has a lot of other good stats to go with it. Very easy to distribute amongst people on your team when you take Font of Life. So the list just goes on and on and on about the accolades of Recon. But at Worlds, 65% win rate, the most dominant support, 53% presence. He's just a powerhouse. Now, in solo queue, he does only have about a 50% win rate, but that's just because he's hard to play for a lot of people. So it's kind of hard to measure that up when you're making a tier list, like how much do you appeal to kind of the average player versus how much do you appeal to the elite players on the champion. But I think that he's difficult to play just because of the decision making. I don't think his mechanics are that hard. You don't have animation cancels and things like that you might have on someone like a Riven. It's simply just learning when to go in, learning when to get back out, and just making the best use of all of your movement in fights. But I think if you can do that reasonably well, you can climb really well with Recon. Like I said, there are a few different builds. We'll talk about some that I think have been successful, maybe a little underrated. I have been doing the defensive boots lately. I know that Ionians are still really popular, and I think those are a good boot if you get really far ahead and you just want more ultimates to make plays. But I don't know where the stat is for, there we go, for the boots. But I've also found success on particularly Mercury treads lately. People have been moving more towards these like chain CC comps, with like Amumu, Malphite, things like that are kind of coming back into vogue a little bit. These 5v5 wombo combo comps, and traditionally those aren't great matchups for Recon. That's where he's really going to struggle the most, because typically when he wants to help people, he has to shield in and stack on top of your ally to give them that shield, and that's not going to be good if you're getting hit with a Ziggs bomb or an Amumu ult or whatever. So he's not fantastic in those matchups to begin with, but I think Mercury Treads does help out a lot. It gives you that magic resist that you need, and then of course the tenacity. And that's really one of the main ways that Recon can lose a game is if he gets chain CC'd and blown up before he gets to move. So I've been finding Mercury Treads very useful. I know a lot of the pros are getting Mercury Treads as well. And then sometimes even plated steel caps. This is a little bit more rare, but if they do have like an AD assassin or something and it's going to be very difficult to not get hit with AD damage, then that could be good, especially if they have Misfortune on their team and she's getting kind of fed and they have other AD, like maybe they have 3 or 4 AD on their team. I think plated steel caps can be a pretty decent move because you are going to be getting hit by Misfortune ults. You know, if they do have a Zed or something and he wants to go on you, he's going to get on you. So I think there are some uses for steel caps, but Mercury Treads I definitely have found some use for. So Ionians are still okay. I haven't been a big fan of mobility boots just because in these team fights it seems like you do get hit by stuff a decent amount just because there is so much AoE, like I said. This is good if you just want to perma roam, but he scales so well with the ability haste that I would just probably go for Ionians if you want an aggressive boot. That's going to give you more ultimates, allow you to make more plays. Then as far as the items go, there are several different options. I think the Shurelya's is what most people still go, which is pretty strong. That movement speed is really, really good on Recon in general, and he scales very well with the AP. You can do Locket, which is a decent, defensive option, but it doesn't have any mana regen on it, which is massive because you can run out of mana on Recon in longer fights. Your spells do get fairly expensive, and you don't have high base mana regen. And it doesn't have AP on it, and he scales extremely well with AP. I think your passive is like a 0.7 or a 0.9, your Q's a 0.7, W's a 0.8, I believe, and then your shield is actually a 1.6 because you get 2.8s on the shield. So he scales extremely well with AP. So that's, those are my main two hesitations. There's no mana and no AP on this item, but it is okay. And then we're seeing the Imperial Mandate kind of make a comeback. I might have to try this out again. They did increase the damage on it, I believe, by like 10 or something last patch. I just kind of defaulted to Shurelya's, but maybe Mandate's back, especially if you have an aggressive lane where you want that extra damage, because Shurelya's doesn't have any proc damage on it. But this is actually pretty significant. I mean, even in the early game, it's going to be like an extra 150 damage or so. So if you find yourself with a Lucian or a Misfortune, that could be a pretty good pick. I wouldn't get Everfrost yet, but in the preseason, watch out. We're going to be testing new items. I think the new Everfrost could actually be quite good on supports, even maybe Recon. So those are kind of your options. And then after that, I think a lot of the times you just want to go Putrefier. There's just so much healing. And this item's already over 100% efficient, I think. So it's just an extremely strong item. And the main thing is about this is it's going to save your AD carry from having to go Executioners or your mid laner from having to go Morellos, which are both much worse, I think, than this item is, because they're giving up a lot of extra collateral stuff to buy those items most of the time. So I think that this is just much, much more efficient if you can afford to get this for that 60% Grievous. Is very nice. But if they don't have a lot of Grievous wounds on their item on their team for some reason, I have been trying out the Staff of Flowing Water again. And this is good if you have a lot of champions that really rely on their abilities and their spells to do damage. And you can also go something like Zeke's. This will give you a little bit more defense. If you have someone who attacks really fast, like a Vayne, a Twitch, or something like that, it's almost like a mini Ardent Sensor. I don't think it's quite as strong as Ardent. It might be in some circumstances, but it's good that it just gives you nice, well-rounded suite of defense and a little bit of mana as well. So it's a pretty good staple, option as a second item. I would be careful with Redemption on Recon. I've tried this out, but you need to make sure that they don't have any Grievous wounds on their team, which is rare these days, or you're going to lose a lot of value off of that, and it's just going to make you squishy. You do have good plus healing and shielding, but if you go for something like a Shurelya's or like a Mandate, that's not going to offer a lot of extra plus healing and shielding. So I do think that Redemption is good if you pair it with Moonstone or if they don't have Grievous, but in the case of Recon, there's probably better options. So, and then you have other stuff you can do. Knight's Vow can help you out against Assassins, maybe. It's not that great of an item in a lot of situations, though. Ardent Sensor can be good if you have those on-hit champs like a Twitch, Jinx, things like that. Although, like I said, Zeke's might be a better version of that. And then Mikhail's if they just have a ton of CC and you just really need to help people not die, Ash Arrow, things like that, then you could consider that. But again, he's not getting as much value out of that plus healing and shielding as some other champs are. So, anyways, Recon, super strong right now. Definitely recommend playing him. Shouldn't come as any surprise. Let's watch the channel. Okay, other faces on here. Blitzcrank I still think is pretty good. I was playing Blitz a lot a few patches ago. I kind of moved off of that because he's so dependent on that one skill shot on your Q. And there is a lot of mobility, you know, on certain champs. He has some bad matchups. He's just an extreme champion is the way that I describe it a lot of times on stream. If you hit the hook, if the enemy team has a lot of immobile, squishy champions, which does happen a lot, if they have Enchanter plus Misfortune, then he looks awesome, right? Because he's just always going to have these targets, and if he lands the hook, he blows them up. He's very dominant. He can muscle people out of lane. He can rotate really well. He's one of the best champions if you get vision control at punishing people who are out of position. So that support that's trying to, you know, walk over and clear your vision, if you set a trap for him, you can easily punish them with Blitzcrank. So I think he's very good, especially as the elo gets lower. He's going to be a lot stronger. However, he does have some really bad situations as well. The thing that I ran into that was really rough is if they have tanks. So especially if they have a Sejuani or a Nunu or something that you really can't blow up that easily early on, or that are going to extend the fights, that's really bad because he's horrible in long fights. If you can't find a good target to hook and blow them up immediately, these like 10 or 15 second fights with tanks and enchanters healing the tanks and all that kind of stuff, a bunch of ranged champions that are spread out, it's very difficult for him to succeed in that environment. So he's bad against tanks. He's pretty bad against anything with a shield or mobility. So if they have an Ezreal or a Lucian, or they're rocking a Sivir, Samira, a lot of things can be, even Tristana, if the Tristana is decent and she knows how to buffer her jump if you're going to hit her with the hook. So I think there are a lot of champions, Vayne, you know, can tumble and dodge it. There are a lot of champions where it's actually pretty hard to hit that hook if they're competent. If it's open field. I mean, obviously, if you have bush control and you hit it out of a bush, you know, that's good. But he's just very, very one-dimensional. You know, how good is that hook? And even a lot of these lethality champions, they're going to get the bubble at some point, right? Whatever that item is called. Edge of Night. Maybe third item. Sometimes even second item against Blitzcrank. And then you might even have, you know, squishy champs in the mid lane. Stuff like, I don't know, Zoe, Orianna, stuff like that. There's a chance they get Banshee's Veil. And so it just, there's a lot of different ways they can ruin your day as Blitzcrank. So he's extreme. If you can take over early, land a lot of hooks, show a lot of presence, dominate the vision game, I think that he can be quite strong. One thing that I've been messing around with is just like Zombie Ward and Ingenious Hunter, especially if you want to go for more of a utility build. So if you want to go for something like Locket or Shirelia's, both of those are item actives, and then you can go for something like a Redemption, which isn't picked a lot but is pretty active. That gives you a little bit more play in team fights, give you a little bit more presence on the map, and then if you take Ingenious Hunter, then it's going to give you a much, much lower cooldown. The main attraction of Ingenious Hunter, though, is it gives you more sweepers as well, and if you have Zombie Ward, that's going to allow you to dominate the vision game, which you really need to do as Blitzcrank, because again, a lot of champions are going to have counterplay to that if they can see you. So you want to make sure that you're clearing out those bushes and that you're in the right position at the right time to get some of those clutch hooks. So that's really why I like that. You know, you can go for Biscuits for a little bit more mana early, which is okay. Time Warp Tonic is cool, I guess, for like running people down. But I still think that Zombie Ward is absolutely clutch on a lot of supports, and especially Blitzcrank, who can really punish off of that vision domination so much. So overall, I think he's good, but he is very extreme, and you do have to be really active early because, again, he falls off an absolute cliff late game, right? Once people get those bubbles, once those tanks start getting some items, especially if you fall behind and you lose vision domination, then he definitely falls off a cliff. This chart is a little misleading because that looks like he's going to like 0%. He's just scaling down to like 51 or 52%. So he's never like absolutely horrible. Like you still always have a chance to land the miracle hook, you know, on some squishy person who's out of position. But his efficacy definitely goes down from being, you know, probably the best champ really early on, especially if you're landing hooks, to just being like an alright champ later. So I think he does deserve a top spot. He does have a really high win rate right now. It's like 53%. So we'll throw him in there. And he is specifically good against all of these other enchanters. Not good against Recon, But against the next 5 champions, he's going to be really good, at least in the early game. Okay, and then I have Sona up here as well. Now, it's a little weird for me to figure out where to place the enchanters because they do have an extremely high win rate. That buff to Moonstone was absolutely massive. Getting that 35% extra plus healing and shielding is huge, obviously early on, especially if you can get some of these tanks on your team, or even these semi-tanks that have like the Gore Drinker Sterix, which is going to be better on this patch. Those are basically tanks, and they help out. Enchanters work really well with them because, you know, they're going to have a lot of base health, so they're not going to get blown up instantly. It's going to draw the fight out because they have the health, because they have the lifesteal, and the shield also contributes that as well. So it's just really hard to blow those champions up once they get those 2 items, and that means you have more time for spells, which is exactly what Sona wants. If you get off 2 or 3 rotations of your W in a team fight, it's over. Like, people just cannot keep up with that healing, especially if you have Moonstone and then either, you know, something like a Redemption or Mikhail's or just something else that's buffing up your plus healing and shielding a ton. It's just really difficult to manage. So I think Sona is one of the best ones there just because she does have low cooldowns, and every time you activate any of your auras, then it can trigger Moonstone. So it's not just one heal every 8 seconds like Yumi. This is constantly just spamming, you know, your WQE over and over again. And she has like some pretty decent utility. So with that E, she gives you the movement speed so that you can personally rotate and your allies can rotate faster. They also changed and reverted her auras so that now she can spam that E to, you know, move around the map faster without making herself go So that's going to be very handy. And then she has pretty good poke early on. Her Q, you just have to be within, I think it's 900 range. There's not even a skill shot, so it's pretty much impossible for the enemy to avoid it. And if you're just raining down, you know, Airy and Spell Thief and Scorch procs or whatever you want to do in the laning phase, you're just going to whittle them down. And it makes it very easy to stack up your passive or whatever it is, your ultimate, to get those stacks of the song. And it makes it very easy for you to get your wards early, just because, again, they can't dodge it. If they want to go up in CS, they're getting hit by your Qs. And they're very cheap early on. It's only like 50 mana. So she's actually a pretty decent harasser early. She's okay for an enchanter against ganks, sort of, as long as you're not grossly mispositioned, just because you can play so far back and you do have that E for the extra bonus movement speed. That does help her juke some hooks and things like that a little bit more as well with the bonus movement speed off of the E. And then, of course, you have your ultimate, which fits really well with a lot of these Wombo combo comps I was talking about with the Amumu, Kennen, Jarvan, Misfortune, all that kind of stuff. It's just really nice if you can layer that together with your R. So that is good. She does have a hard time starting fights. You can hit your R. That does help if you like Flash R or something. But in general, you're relying on your team to start the fights. So, again, she's at her best when you have, you know, tanks or just someone who's willing to go in there and start it, right? Like a Jarvan, Sejuani, Nunu, stuff like that. If it's just a bunch of assassins, right? If you have, like, I don't know, Talon jungle and your top lane is, you know, Riven and your mid lane is Yasuo or something like that, you might have a hard time operating with that if it's just a bunch of squishy fighter, you know, YOLO Q type of champs. But she's the queen of 5v5 team fights, scales extremely well. You can even take barrier on her if you want to. Heal is nice. That's probably what you want to do just because it pairs together so well with Moonstone, because the extra 35% healing off of Moonstone applies to summoners. It does apply to barrier as well. But barrier does give you that personal protection that's really nice if they have a long range kill type of mechanic, or if they have a lot of grievous wounds on their team, which they're going to get against you. Barrier's still going to give you that full value. It just doesn't help your allies out much. So just be aware of that. Exhaust is another option that's okay. But anyways, so I think she's still going to be a pretty strong choice right now. It's just she is more vulnerable to Blitzcrank, to some of these hard engages, but people aren't playing those as much as they once were. Like, they're still there, but, you know, Nami's the most popular champ. Then you've got Yumi, Lulu, you know, Lux. So there are still the hook champions. You got your Blitz, your Pike, your Leona, your Thresh. So it's still there, but, you're getting a little more situations where it's good. And she's even good against those champs late game. You know, if Blitz doesn't like completely shut you down in the first 15 minutes and you get, you know, a couple of items, you crush him later on in team fights. As long as he's not pulling your squishies like super far out of position, it's very, very difficult for Blitz to deal with you late game. Okay. Yumi is another one. I talked about her in the patch notes a lot. She did get nerfed on this patch, so I moved her down a little bit. And she does only have about a 50% win rate overall, so she's not like super dominant in a statistical sense, but she's just really extreme, kind of like Blitzcrank, but she's extreme on the other end. Instead of early game hyper dominance, it's late game hyper dominance. So her laning phase is pretty suspect. Her vision control is horrible. It's because a lot of people won't help you place those wards. But you can't be targeted late game. You give people extra AP and AD. You give them extra movement speed, heals. You have a massive hitbox AoE root for 1.75 seconds. You pair together extremely well with Moonstone because just jumping around to different targets with your W counts as interaction, which is going to keep giving them those Moonstone procs. It's going to keep giving them the Airy shields. So she's very, very good. And she actually puts up some decent poke if they don't have a root in the laning phase. If you're just continually hitting your hooks and just landing those auto attacks for the extra mana, you can wear people down pretty quickly against something like an Ezreal or a Vayne that's not going to be able to fight you back that much early on. She can be pretty decent. You just obviously have to be careful if you're against like Leona or Draven, something like that. It's going to be rough. So I think that she is very good. She is extreme. She's one of the best late game champions, especially if anyone on your team does well in any lane and they're playing a 1v9 hyper carry, which there are a lot of those out there, then it just makes the game almost impossible to win, right? If she attaches to like 5-kill Camille late game, it's, I mean, good luck. So that's why she's banned out of pro. She doesn't even have that much of a high win rate. It's okay. It's like 53%, but people just don't want to mess with it. She's got 60 bans just because there's always that risk, you know? It's very difficult to interact with her late game. So her healing and the movement speed did get nerfed, but it's still really, really good. And she still brings all those other properties I mentioned. So I still think she's good. She's just a bit riskier than she was, and statistically she's one of the weaker enchanters, but she's good. Okay, Soraka, I just kind of have her up here out of respect just because she does have a high win rate. It's about 53% overall. I would probably rather play Sona in most situations just because I think Sona is a little bit more versatile. She does have that condition-free movement speed where you can speed yourself up and your allies up, you know, kind of on the fly. She does have that guaranteed hit with her Q, which allows you to stack your Frostfang, allows you to, you know, get your Airy procs, do a little bit of poke damage. And a lot of Sona's healing, or like her W, her effective healing is built into shields. So she has healing and shielding. So if they have grievous wounds, it kind of sucks. It's going to slow you down, but you're still giving out those shields which aren't affected by grievous wounds. So she just has a little bit more of a hedge. And you have your ultimate, which is very good layering with those team fights like I mentioned. With Soraka, on the other hand, you don't have that. You don't have any shields. You don't have any non-conditional ways to get that movement speed. You can hit people with your Q, and then you can heal an ally with a W, and it's going to give you both movement speed. But, again, that's conditional. So it's a little bit harder to use. You can't rotate between lanes as fast. And you don't have very much CC. You do have that silence, and that is very good against certain champions like Nunu or Rammus. Soraka is fantastic because it interrupts their channel. It stops Nunu with his snowball, and it stops Rammus with his power ball. So there are definitely certain situations where she is really good. I just feel that so much of her power is budgeted into her heal, and with everybody taking grievous wounds anyways, regardless of if Soraka's in the game, then it's basically free that they get to counter you, right? Versus in certain metas where there's not as much healing, it can be really annoying if you play Soraka for the enemy team because they have to get grievous wounds just for you, which is going to set them behind with the rest of their build. But because grievous wounds is already out there, that's not really an opportunity cost right now. It's just something that's mandatory. Every team has to have grievous wounds. So she does have the high win rate. I respect it. She does have the global presence, which is cool with your ult. You know, you can make plays across the map. I just think she has a little bit less utility than Sona, and in the vast majority of situations, I'd rather just play Sona. But she's still going to be pretty good. Nami surprisingly has a pretty low win rate overall compared to many of the other enchanters. It's only 51% as of the last patch. Now, she is extremely strong with Lucian, specifically just because they changed Lucian around to where when someone targets him with something, he gets extra damage off of his passive. And they changed the way that Electrocute works with her E, where when your E procs, it counts towards your Electrocute. So if Lucian goes in, you put an E on him, you know, he dashes in, double attacks, and then hits him with a Q, that's going to trigger Electrocute. So if your ally hits anything on them, you know, to get 3 triggers to use your 3 stacks, and remember those stacks of your E do apply to spells now. It's not just auto attacks. They changed that, I think, last year. It's very, very easy, in other words, to trigger Electrocute. And when you're talking about E amplifying your damage, Electrocute amplifying the damage of your ally, Mandate, which you're going to get amplifying your ally, getting that guaranteed damage off of your W bouncing around. And that can actually double proc on Lucian, I believe. If you target your ally first with the W, Lucian dashes in, you hit him with the W, he lands those 2 auto attacks, and then it bounces the W, your W bounces over to them, to the enemy, and then back to Lucian, and he's already used those 2 charges off of his passive. I believe it will refill it and give him 2 more charges. So it's just crazy, like how good the synergy is with those 2 and Lucian's double shot mechanic. So that's a really terror of a lane. It's very, very good. It's even getting played in pro. I don't think the win rate was like insane. I mean, 58% is pretty insane in pro, so it's pretty good. It's a fairly low sample size, 7 and 12, but it's still good. But yeah, she is very strong. Where she falls off, though, is I think she's weaker to other enchanters if they make it through the laning phase. Especially if you don't have Lucian, if you can't hard punish as much early, then you are going to get outscaled. You only have 1 heal on your W. It's not a fantastic ratio. It's okay. It's on a 10-second cooldown, you know, versus Sona, who's just like spamming, you know, heals every like 3 seconds late game. It's a lot harder to keep up with that. So she's okay. She has a lot of utility. There is more counterplay to her kit. You know, with so many dashes in the game, you can dash and dodge bubble. You can dodge, you know, tidal wave very easily. People, you know, when I would play Nami a lot, they'd spam me like, "Why don't you throw the tidal wave out?" It's like, because they're 1,000 units away and it's open field. They're just gonna walk out of it. So anyway, sometimes people underestimate just how slow and how small of a hitbox that is for something compared to like Maokai's is slow, but it's like an entire lane worth of hitbox. So anyways, she's okay. I think that she is strong, especially with early game dominant champions like Lucian, but overall she does have a bit of a lower win rate. And the last few here, because I do want to keep this under 30, Lulu's okay. She does, you know, have a lot of buffs. You know, her W is really good with auto-attacking champions, your Twitches, your Lulus, Vaynes, all of that is excellent. The main reason she's just fallen out of favor a little bit is she doesn't pair as well with Moonstone as other champs. She would really, really much rather take Shirelia's just because she doesn't have a lot of ways to trigger Moonstone, right? She has, I guess she has her W and her E, but what I'm trying to say is the plus healing and shielding portion of Moonstone doesn't synergize with her kit as well as other champions because she only has 1 shield. She has her E. It does not benefit your R at all. Your R is an infusion of health. It's not a heal. So it's not affected by grievous wounds, but it also is not buffed by anything that gives plus healing and shielding power. So that makes her a little bit weaker on the scaling end in terms of the healing, but she does still bring a lot of utility to the role. So she's still spooky, very good against a lot of like melee assassin type of champs, but not positioned as well as some of the other champs out there. I think her win rate's actually negative right now. It was like, no, not quite. It's like 50%, but it's definitely on the low end. So certain matchups, Twitch, Kog'Maw, I think she's still very good, but other than that, there might be a better choice. Leona, it feels weird to put her this low because it feels like she is always a dominant force. She's such a menace, has so much CC. She can engage through the waves, really low cooldowns on everything from her ultimate to just her basic chain CC. The items are still good on her with Locket and Zeke's, but they just nerfed her a little bit a few patches ago, and I think the game has slowed down a little bit where, you know, she just has to hard dominate early, kind of like Blitzcrank, or she's going to get outscaled later. And it's just a lot harder to completely close out games right now. So she's still good. I still think she's probably one of the best engaged champions outside of like Blitz. Blitz is unique because he can threaten people kind of anywhere, anytime, right? He can pull people completely out of position through brush. You don't have to worry about going over the brush yourself. You can still threaten them when they're trying to CC under tower. You can still hit them with hooks. Versus with Leona early on, you can't threaten under tower as well until you get a couple of items, or at least like, you know, some armor, so that you don't get completely blown up. And it's really hard to pull the trigger to like go over a wall and engage on someone if you don't have really deep vision and you're not sure that your allies are going to follow up. So Blitz's hook is just much more devastating, but Leona is much more well-rounded than Blitzcrank. She's just not as extreme. And I think this meta is a lot of these champions, some of the top ones are going to be extreme champions. So anyways, she's okay. I still think she's good. A lot of ADCs are also taking cleanse more often now. So like Misfortune will be taking cleanse, Aphelios will be taking cleanse, and her stuff can be cleansed. Blitzcrank cannot be cleansed as easily. I think you might be able to cleanse it and then flash out of it if he hooks you. I'm not 100% about that. But with Leona, you know, you can cleanse her ult and get out of a lot of situations. So obviously her ult's on a shorter cooldown than cleanse, but that's just a little bit more counterplay to her than some of the traditional champs. And we're over 30, but whatever, we'll keep it under 35. Nautilus is okay. You know, I know we've had some new people on the channel that are big fans of Nautilus, and he's still alright. The main thing with Nautilus is that his damage is fairly low early game compared to something like a Leona or like a Blitzcrank if he lands his hook. And then he's very mana intensive compared to other champs. You know, Leona might as well not have mana cost, and Blitz does have high cost, but it's basically you just, you know, throw hooks until you hit one. Nautilus does have really good wave clear with his E, if you max that, which I think is what you probably want to max. I know some people have been maxing the Q, which is probably valid if you're fishing for hooks, but the E is just more teamfight damage to make up for the fact that your baseline damage is a little bit lower, and it does give you more wave clear, so that you can push in the wave, roam, make a play on dragon, so on and so forth. So yeah, it looks like a lot of people are maxing the E. People on the channel were telling me people were maxing Q first. It's very, very similar, right? So if you go for, it looks like a lot of people are maxing the Q first, but the E max does have a higher win rate, but it's close enough to be negligible, I guess. I still prefer the EWQ max. Just, I think you have to go W second just for survivability a lot of times, but that E is just the guaranteed wave clear, much, much more damage in team fights. Versus the Q is going to let you fish for hooks a little bit more if you want to, but you're not going to have any wave clear, and your team fight damage is going to be significantly lower. So I guess it just depends on how likely your team is to team fight. But I think that team fights, as I've said, you know, about a bunch of champions are very popular right now. You're seeing a bunch of these wombo combo comps, at least in my games. So he's okay, just high mana cost. The one thing that's very nice about him is he's good against mobile champs just because it's really hard to dodge his missile, or it takes a lot more skill than most people at low diamond and lower have to dodge that missile. So champions like Ezreal and Tristana can dodge the missile if they time their buffer picture perfect, right? If that missile is literally just about to hit them as Ezreal and you blink, then you can get out of it, right? Or Tristana, if you time it right when that missile is going to hit them, if you jump, you can get out of it. Sivir obviously can block it. I think Samira can block it with her thing. So there is counterplay in the game to it. Obviously, anyone that gets a bubble is going to be able to block it, but it's going to hit a lot of people. It's harder to get around that, especially in a team fight where it's knocking up everyone in the way when you target the backline with the missile. Is going to be a lot more effective than like a Leona in a team fight, I feel like. So anyways, he is good, probably underappreciated, but nevertheless, going to be a little bit weaker than some of the other champs. But anyways, that's all I'm going to mention for today. I think that like Amumu's still like okay, I guess. I know he was all the rage about a month ago. We played against Amumu. He did beat us last night on stream, but in general, I've not been super impressed. I think you have to hard dominate early, but he can just get so punished if you don't completely take over the game. I know Zillion was played in the most recent semifinal match a couple of times. he's okay. He does have a lot of movement speed. I would just probably rather play something like Sona, but if you do want to protect against all-in assassins, he is an alright option there. And then Morgana is very good against the hard engaged champs, obviously, like the Leonas, the Nautiluses, Recon, but she has a hard time against enchanters, so it's kind of a tough spot to be in right now. Anyways, thank you very much. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.